Landing gear assembly. In this section, you'll need the base frame plate, your landing gear plate, and bag 1 containing 4 landing gear screws and 4 Teflon nuts. Your landing gear should have arrived flat like this. I've pre-bent mine on a bench vise at the corresponding notches on the corners. Next, position the landing gear underneath the frame plate. Install the 4 screws up through the bottom of the landing gear and through the frame plate, and tighten the 4 Teflon nuts on top. Motors and speed controls. In this section, you'll need 4 motors, 4 speed controls, bag 2 that includes 12 pieces of shrink tubing, and a heat gun. I usually flip over 2 speed controls to remind myself that these are going to be going a different direction. Let's start by separating out the wires on the motors and installing the heat shrink tubing. Slide 1 piece of shrink tubing all the way up each one of the wires for all 4 motors. Next, we will connect the speed controls to the motors. You'll notice that there's an A, B, and a C on the speed controls, and a yellow, a black, and a red wire on the motors. The black wire will always go to B on the speed controls. The yellow wire going to A will always make the speed control be reverse direction. The yellow wire going to C will make it be normal direction. We're going to set up these two, the first two, to be yellow to A for reverse rotation. Once you've made the connections, slide the shrink tubing down over the connectors, making sure that you overlap the insulator on both pieces of wire. On these second 2 motors, we will be connecting the yellow wire to C for normal rotation. Now, with all of the connections made and the heat shrink tubing in place, all that's left to do is heat shrink all of the shrink tubing pieces with your heat gun, being careful not to burn the wires, the insulators, or any of the heat shrink tubing. Mounting motors and speed controls. In this section, you'll need the frame and landing gear from earlier sections, the motors and speed controls from the previous section, a Phillips screwdriver, and bag 3. We will start by installing our 2 reverse rotation motors first. These will be the ones with the yellow wire connected to A on the speed control. They will go in the front left and right rear positions on our vehicle. Align the wires along the motor armature towards the center of the craft. Loosely install 4 screws, one at a time, up through the plate into the motor. Once all 4 are in loosely, you can then tighten them up and sink them down. After these 2 motors have been tightened into position, we can install the other 2 motors, the normal rotation motors, on the front right and left rear of the craft. Securing the motor wires. In this section, you'll need bag 4 that includes 4 pieces of 1/8" spiral wrap. Start by uncoiling the end of the spiral wrap just a tiny bit. I usually put about 2 wraps around the black center wire and slide it up to the motor, and then I begin wrapping around the motor armature until I reach near the frame. Try to keep the wires stacked in a pyramid shape along the motor armature and wrap the spiral wrap very, very tightly. Once you reach the end of the motor armature, begin wrapping it up the speed control wires and finish it off how you like. Repeat this step with the remaining 3 motors. Main power harness. In this section, you will need bag 5 and a heat gun. You'll notice there are 2 sizes of shrink tubing. We will begin by sliding the 8 larger ones up the main power leads for all 4 speed controls. Next, plug in all of the speed controls to their color-matched corresponding plug on the wiring harness. Now slide the shrink tubing over the connectors, making sure to overlap the wire insulator on both ends. Once those are in place, we can now put on the 2 smaller pieces of shrink tubing on the 2mm accessory power plugs. Leave them hanging off the end just a little bit. Using your heat gun, shrink all of the shrink tubing down, including the 2 2mm accessory plugs. The small amount that you left hanging over the end, squeeze it together to keep any moisture from getting into the plug while it's still hot. Next, cut 4 10cm long pieces of Velcro from the roll. We will use these to secure the speed controls in place. Make sure that you put the heatsink on the speed control against the frame. With the padded side of the Velcro against the speed control, wrap it very tightly around the frame and the speed control. Do this to all 4. Frame preparation for flight control board installation. In this section, you'll need bag 6, scissors and Velcro, and a micro-tipped regular screwdriver. Let's begin by installing the flight control board standoffs. Keep 4 of the Teflon screws inside of bag 6 for a later section. We won't be using them right now. Put the Teflon screws up through the corresponding holes in the frame from the bottom, and hand tighten the Teflon standoffs. Cut 2 pieces of Velcro 7 and 11 centimeters long. Wrap the shorter one around the rear frame support and the longer one around the front frame support, being sure to keep the padded side against the frame and the overlap on the bottom. Use a micro screwdriver or a small pin to pry up the tab on the speed control plug and remove the red center wire from the right front and both of the rear speed control plugs. Slide the small pieces of string tubing from the flight control board bag over the 3 power leads, leaving about 1/8 of an inch hanging off of the end. Use a heat gun to shrink the 3 pieces of string tubing down and squeeze the ends so that no moisture can get in. Now align the wires through the flight control board standoffs so they come out through the right side of the craft. Flight control board and receiver preparation. In this section, you'll need bag 7, your receiver, and the contents of the flight control bag. First, we'll install the piezo buzzer in the upper right-hand corner of the board. Notice that the red wire goes near the closest outer edge. Next, we'll retrieve the rest of the contents from the receiver bag and bag 7. You shouldn't need your bind plug, as we've already bound the receiver for you. You'll notice each one of the servo wires has 3 colors: brown, red, and yellow, and there are 5 rows of pins along the left-hand side of the board. Install all 5 servo leads with the brown ground wire closest to the edge of the board. Respectively, these are channels 1 through 5, aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder, and your auxiliary channel. The channel numbers are marked out on your receiver that these are going to get plugged in. You'll notice that the ground section is actually marked on the receiver itself also, which happens to be down. So put the brown ground wire towards the bottom and plug in 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, etc. Flight control board installation. In this section, you'll need the flight control board, the receiver, the 4 Teflon screws remaining in bag 6, and a Phillips screwdriver. First, we'll get those 4 Teflon screws that were left over in bag 6. Next, align the flight control board with the standoffs, making sure to keep the 4 buttons towards the back. Wrap the wires for the receiver underneath it and run it in between the back two standoffs. Loosely install the Teflon screws one at a time until all four are in, and then tighten them down. Next, cut a 3 cm and a 15 cm piece of Velcro from the roll. Wrap the 15 cm piece of Velcro around the receiver and the frame, starting on the bottom and keeping the overlap on the bottom. Now we'll tuck the wire for the piezo buzzer underneath the flight control board and place this 3 cm piece of Velcro across the wires to attach it to the frame. Now let's plug in the motors. We'll start with the left front. This will be motor number 1. Plug it in to the row of pins on the right hand side of the flight control board with the black ground wire towards the outside of the board. The right front, this will be number 2. The right rear, number 3. And the left rear, number 4. Now that all the motors are plugged in, secure the wires and tuck them away underneath the flight control board. Feel free to use a zip tie if necessary. Next, cut an 8 cm long piece of Velcro from the roll. We'll be using this piece of Velcro to attach the antenna to the right rear landing strut leg. Wrap the piece of Velcro around the antenna housing one time, and then push it down against the leg, being careful not to stretch the wire too hard, and then wrap the Velcro around the leg once. Cut the remaining Velcro on the roll in half. Use one piece for the front and one piece for the rear of the craft. These will hang down centered for attaching the battery. Once these are in place, you've completed the 1PX4 assembly, and now please continue on to pre-flight.